Lydia Harlan smoothed the crisp sheets in the Plaza Hotel suite, her rough hands moving carefully over the silk. 3 floors below, her daughter Maya glided through the ballroom in a custom Vera Wang gown, surrounded by waves of applause. They were in the same building on the same night, yet worlds apart. Lydia wore a simple polyester maid's uniform, the kind that marked her as part of the invisible staff. Maya, young and radiant, was marrying into one of New York's wealthiest families. When the beautiful bride passed her mother in the hallway earlier, she had looked straight through her, as if the woman who had given her life simply did not exist. Lydia's hands carried the stubborn scent of her work, a sharp mix of industrial bleach, ammonia, and lemon polish. It was the unmistakable smell of labor that most people never saw. Tonight that harsh scent clashed with the perfumed air of the 7th-floor hallway, thick with baccarat rouge, blooming orchids, and expensive champagne. Wealthy guests brushed past her housekeeping cart without a glance, treating her like another piece of hotel furniture, a silent shadow in a crisp gray uniform. She had no gold-foiled invitation to the grand ballroom downstairs. Her name was not written in elegant calligraphy on any seating chart. Mothers of the bride were supposed to sit at the head table in custom silk dresses, dabbing tears of joy with lace handkerchiefs. Lydia wore rubber-soled work shoes and wiped smudges from mirrors with microfiber cloths. She had begged her supervisor for this particular Saturday night shift, trading away weekends of overtime just for the chance to catch even a passing glimpse of her own daughter. She pushed the heavy cart over the thick patterned carpet, the wheels giving their familiar soft squeak. Every push, every scrubbed bathtub, every stripped bed had carried a single purpose. Maya was brilliant, and brilliant girls belonged at places like Columbia. But Ivy League dreams came with crushing costs. Lydia had calculated exactly how many rooms it took to pay for a semester's books, how many double shifts equaled a meal plan. She had cleaned thousands of rooms over the years, on her hands and knees, never once complaining. She believed she was building a bridge for her daughter to cross into a safer, better life. She never imagined that once Maya crossed it, she would burn the bridge behind her and erase the woman who had laid every brick. Downstairs, the jazz band played a slow, sweeping melody that drifted faintly up the grand staircase. Lydia paused near a polished brass sconce and closed her eyes, allowing herself one fleeting second to imagine she was down there too, holding a crystal glass, smiling at the groom's family. The cold metal of the cart handle pulled her back. This was her place. That was Maya's world. She had accepted her role as the hidden secret, willing to love her daughter silently from the shadows of the hallway. But fate has a way of dragging buried truths into the light. Lydia reached into her apron pocket and touched the small, crumpled newspaper clipping announcing the society engagement. It was the only piece of the wedding she was permitted to keep, a fragile treasure hidden beneath bleach and dust rags. She pulled out a fresh towel and wiped the brass fixture again, needing to look busy in case her manager passed by. The VIP floor was meant to stay quiet while the reception roared below. Room after room stood empty except for the grand bridal suite reserved for the newlyweds. Lydia moved methodically, head down, following the cardinal rule of her invisible job: never make direct eye contact with the guests. She wondered if Maya ever thought of her on a day like this. When the bride looked in the mirror that morning, did she see her mother's tired eyes looking back? Lydia swallowed the bitter lump in her throat and told herself that Maya's happiness was enough, even if that happiness required her to remain invisible forever. She leaned against the cart for a moment, resting her aching back. The shift was long and far from over. She thought she was safe in the quiet corridor, that she could finish her work and slip away to her empty apartment. She was wrong. Downstairs, the music grew louder and the laughter more insistent. Maya needed a moment of silence. Her phone buzzed inside her beaded clutch with an urgent call from the planner about a missing floral arrangement. She slipped out of the ballroom and headed for the secluded VIP wing, an area off-limits to regular guests. She wanted privacy to vent without anyone hearing. She turned the corner sharply, eyes fixed on her glowing screen, assuming the entire floor belonged to her. Lydia was moving in the opposite direction, gripping the cold metal handle of her cart, with both tired hands focused on finishing her final sweep. The wheels gave their soft squeak against the carpet. She stepped from the shadow of an alcove just as Maya rushed forward. The heavy cart clipped a large floral display. Maya collided with the metal frame, stumbled back, and her phone slipped from her fingers onto the carpet. She gasped in anger, brushing furiously at her pristine gown, ready to demand the clumsy maid be fired on the spot. Then her eyes met her mother's face. Time seemed to stop in the dimly lit corridor. Lydia froze, knuckles white on the cart handle. For one split second, pure joy flooded through her. She was seeing her beautiful daughter up close on her wedding day. She took a small step forward, lips parting to offer a quiet greeting. What came next shattered that fragile hope. Maya did not smile. There was no flicker of recognition or shared happiness. The color drained from her face. Her expression shifted from annoyance to pure terror. She looked like someone who had seen a ghost. Panic flashed in her eyes. She glanced frantically over her shoulder to make sure none of her wealthy new in-laws had followed her upstairs. Her breathing turned shallow. Her carefully constructed socialite persona was standing right beside a housekeeping cart, and the hidden truth of her past was suddenly threatening to destroy her perfect future. She grabbed Lydia's arm, sharp acrylic nails digging into the thin gray uniform, and dragged her mother into the shadows beside the massive double doors of the bridal suite. She pushed her hard against the wall and checked the hallway for privacy, her beautiful face twisted into something ugly and furious. She kept her voice low, a venomous whisper, demanding to know if Lydia was trying to sabotage her new life. Every hissed word landed like a slap. Lydia stood frozen, back pressed to the elegant wallpaper. She reached out one calloused hand to touch the delicate lace veil. Maya slapped the hand away as if it carried a disease. She stepped back in horror and pointed a trembling finger at the cheap uniform, reminding Lydia of her new husband's elite family. Julian came from a prestigious line of diplomats and politicians. What would they think if they knew the beautiful bride's mother cleaned toilets for a living? Lydia tried to speak through the painful lump in her throat. She explained that she had worked double shifts just to be here tonight, that she only wanted to stand quietly in the shadows and watch her little girl. The unconditional love in her broken voice was heartbreaking. Any ordinary person would have wept at that moment, but Maya had replaced her heart with a burning hunger for status. She crossed her arms over her expensive gown and told Lydia she was a humiliating stain on her perfect new life. As far as her wealthy new family knew, she was an orphan. She ordered the woman who had given her life to never claim her as a daughter again. Then she snapped open her designer clutch, pulled out a crisp $100 bill, and tossed it onto the dirty metal cart beside a damp rag that smelled of cheap lemon polish. She told Lydia to take the money and leave through the service elevator immediately. Lydia stared at the bill resting on her cart. Her chest ached as if her ribs were cracking. She had scrubbed 1,000 floors to buy her daughter a better life. Her reward was a discarded bill and a command to disappear. Maya turned her back without a trace of regret and walked away, adjusting her diamond earrings as she returned to her glamorous world. The $100 bill sat on the scratched cart, looking completely out of place. Maya believed it was a generous final payoff, enough to buy her mother's silence for the night. She assumed a poor hotel maid would grab the cash and vanish. But Lydia had not come to this floor merely to steal a glimpse of her daughter. That was only part of her plan. For months, she had worked brutal double shifts, picking up every extra weekend and late-night spill without complaint, ruining her back and knees in the process. She had quietly saved a substantial sum, every dollar earned through invisible labor. That money was meant for the extravagant imported white orchids now decorating the ballroom downstairs. Maya had ordered those flowers on a hidden high-interest credit card, desperate to impress her new in-laws, with no way to pay the bill when it came due. Lydia had found the overdue invoice by accident. A mother who loves her child does not want her starting married life buried in secret debt. Just days earlier, Lydia had walked into an upscale Manhattan florist, wearing her worn winter coat, and placed a thick envelope of crumpled bills on the polished counter. She had paid off her daughter's reckless vanity in full with cash earned from her own sweat and aching body, and now she stood alone in the dark hallway, staring at a single $100 bill her own daughter had thrown at her like she was a beggar on the street. The irony cut like a jagged knife. She had bought the very flowers Maya was proudly showing off to high society, yet she was not even allowed to breathe the same air as the guests. Lydia reached for her spray bottle instead of the money. She squeezed her eyes shut, trying to hold back the burning tears. She felt utterly broken. Inside the bridal suite, Elias Langford leaned back in a velvet armchair and let out a weary sigh. The reception downstairs had been loud and draining. He preferred quiet corners and real conversations. The suite was supposed to be a silent sanctuary, but the heavy wooden door had not clicked fully shut earlier, leaving a narrow gap to the hallway. A sharp sound broke the stillness, muffled struggle, dragging footsteps, then a voice he recognized but had never heard like this before. It was Maya's voice, but stripped of its sweet melodic tone. This voice was cold and dripping with venom. Elias listened as his future daughter-in-law attacked another human being, calling her a dirty stain on her perfect life, hurling elitist insults at a woman who had clearly suffered in silence. He felt a deep knot tighten in his stomach. He was a man who valued character above all else. He had spent his life pushing back against those who looked down on working people. He heard the quiet, broken sound of a mother sobbing. He heard Maya declare herself an orphan to the world. He heard the metallic clink of the cart and the crisp rustle of a bill being tossed like garbage. Maya thought she was alone in that dark corner. She had no idea the most powerful man in the building was sitting only feet away, listening to every word. Elias stood slowly, movements deliberate and charged with quiet fury. He adjusted his tuxedo sleeve, jaw set. He was no longer just a guest at this wedding. He was a witness who had heard a devastating confession of character. He thought of his own mother, who had spent decades scrubbing office floors in Chicago. He thought of the pride he still carried for her. He looked at the narrow gap in the door and knew what he had to do. He pulled the door wide open. The hallway light spilled in. Lydia was still there, leaning against her cart, shoulders shaking with silent grief. She looked small and defeated. Elias stepped into the corridor, his presence filling the space with authority. He did not speak to Maya, who was already hurrying back toward the ballroom. He looked only at the maid and the discarded bill on the cart. He realized Maya had just made the most expensive mistake of her life. The heavy door swung open with a commanding thud against the wallpaper. Maya flinched and spun around, her face draining of color when she saw her future father-in-law standing there. Her survival instincts kicked in instantly. She forced a bright, practiced smile and stepped in front of her weeping mother, blocking his view. She laughed lightly, the sound brittle and nervous, and claimed the confused maid had been harassing her for extra tips. She expected Elias to call security and have the woman removed. Elias did not smile. He did not even look at her. His face remained unreadable and terrifying in its stillness. He walked past the expensive Vera Wang gown, as if it were invisible, and stopped directly in front of the scratched metal cart. He looked down at the damp rag smelling of cheap lemon polish. Slowly, he reached out and picked up the crisp $100 bill. He held it between his fingers for a long, uncomfortable moment, then lifted his gaze to Lydia. He did not see a bothersome hotel worker. He looked into her red, exhausted eyes and saw decades of quiet, back-breaking maternal sacrifice. He saw swollen knuckles and permanently tired shoulders. The silence in the hallway grew heavier than any words. Maya stood frozen behind him, her fake smile melting into dread. The expensive illusion she had built was collapsing. Elias turned to her at last. He did not raise his voice. The quiet tone made his words even more devastating. He told her to stop insulting his intelligence with obvious lies. He had heard every cruel word she had hissed in the shadows. Maya's face flushed deep red. She stammered a weak defense about protecting the family's prestigious reputation, about wanting to fit into their elite world without bringing shame. Elias gave a low, bitter laugh. He looked at her designer gown and glittering diamonds and explained that she had misunderstood what his family valued. They did not care about fake pedigrees or aristocratic family trees. They cared about integrity, loyalty, and how a person treats those who have nothing. Lying about her own mother was an unforgivable red flag, proof of rotten character. A person who discards family for social status cannot be trusted with an empire. How could she honor wedding vows if she could not honor her own mother? She had mistaken superficial wealth for real human class. True class is never about the labels you wear to impress strangers. It is about the burdens you are willing to carry for the people you love. He pointed to Lydia and declared that this hardworking maid had more class than the bride standing before him. Lydia had sacrificed her body to give her daughter a future. Maya had taken that gift and twisted it into something ugly. She had traded genuine love for a fleeting moment of approval. Elias held up the $100 bill so it caught the light. This piece of paper was not a generous tip or a clever bribe. It was the exact pathetic price she had placed on her own soul. She had sold out her loving mother for a temporary seat at a fancy table. He reminded her of the Family Charity Foundation dedicated to uplifting the working class and supporting struggling single mothers. How could she sit on that board and pretend to care about the less fortunate while her own mother scrubbed toilets in secret? The hypocrisy was sickening. He asked how she planned to live with such a toxic lie. Maya began to cry. But these were no longer tears of manipulation. They were tears of crushing realization. Elias looked at her with cold disappointment. He was a man who knew a terrible investment when he saw one. The beautiful woman before him looked like emotional bankruptcy. He needed a daughter-in-law who could lead with real strength, not a shallow socialite who threw her mother away like trash. He took a steadying breath and turned his full attention to Lydia. His voice softened. He told Maya she had misunderstood what real power looks like. She thought it was about designer dresses and hiding every trace of struggle. She was wrong. He told her about the brutal Chicago winters of his own childhood, the tiny drafty apartment where the radiator barely worked. His mother had worked the graveyard shift, cleaning office buildings, wearing a uniform much like Lydia's, riding freezing buses in the dark so her son could have opportunities she never had. She had spent 30 years on her hands and knees, ruining her back and joints to pay for his education. She had broken her own body so he would never have to. On the day he opened his first major company headquarters, his mother had been his guest of honor. He had held her calloused hands in front of every wealthy investor in the room so they would know exactly who had built the man they were doing business with. He respected her sweat and sacrifice more than any stock portfolio. The contrast between his pride and Maya's shame was sickening to him. He delivered his final verdict with quiet conviction. A person who feels ashamed of the hands that raised them will never know how to cherish anything else. He told Maya the prestigious board seat she had craved was no longer hers. The foundation existed to help working-class families and exhausted single mothers exactly like Lydia. How could she pretend to care about poor women while keeping her own mother hidden? A person who throws her mother away like garbage has nothing to offer the world and no place making decisions for a charitable organization. Maya flinched as if struck. Losing that seat was a brutal social blow, stripping away her fake armor. She had sacrificed her mother for power and now had lost both. Elias was not finished. He turned to the wedding reception waiting downstairs. He told Maya to think carefully about the gold ring waiting on its velvet pillow and the sacred vows she was about to make. He asked if she still believed she was worthy of walking back into that ballroom. He did not cancel the wedding outright. He placed the crushing weight of the decision on her own shoulders. He told her to look in the nearest mirror, past the flawless makeup and diamonds, and examine the dark emptiness inside her own heart. Could she look a good man in the eye and promise to love him in sickness and health? Could she vow to honor his family when she had so brutally betrayed her own? A marriage built on toxic lies would inevitably collapse and crush them both. He told her to stay in the hallway and decide whether she was a woman capable of real love or merely an actress playing a desperate role. If she was only an actress, she should leave quietly through the service exit before she ruined his son's life forever. The choice was hers. Elias turned his back on the devastated bride and walked away. The heavy tension in the hallway was broken by approaching footsteps. Julian Langford was coming down the corridor, sharp in his tailored tuxedo, expecting to find his father and bride chatting happily. Instead, he walked into a frozen scene of heartbreak. His powerful father standing silent and cold, his flawless bride weeping against the wallpaper, and a quiet hotel maid in a cheap gray uniform standing broken beside a metal cart. Julian stopped and asked what was happening. Elias did not soften the truth. He calmly told his son exactly how Maya had spoken to her own mother and what the discarded $100 bill meant. Julian stood perfectly still, absorbing the sickening reality of the woman he loved. Maya lunged forward and grabbed his sleeve, sobbing, begging him to understand. She was terrified of losing him. She had been scared he would reject her if he knew her real background. She pleaded for pity, hoping his love would blind him to her cruelty. Julian gently but firmly pulled his arm away. He looked down at her and told her she had misjudged his heart. He had fallen in love with her brilliant mind and fierce drive. He had never cared about her bank account or imaginary family tree. But watching her treat another human being like garbage, especially the human being who was the reason she was standing there at all, was something he could barely stomach. He turned his back on his weeping bride and walked straight to the exhausted woman by the cart. He looked at Lydia's swollen red hands gripping the spray bottle. Slowly, he reached out and took both of her rough, calloused hands in his own. He did not care about the harsh smell of bleach. He simply held the hands that had scrubbed 1,000 floors to build his bride's future. He looked her in the eyes with absolute respect and gently squeezed her trembling fingers. He told her she was not going anywhere near the service elevator tonight. Elias stepped forward and offered Lydia his strong right arm. He did not treat her like an embarrassing secret to be hidden. He treated her like an honored guest. Julian took her left arm. The two powerful men stood tall on either side of the small, tired woman, creating an unbreakable protective wall around her. Lydia tried to pull away in panic. She whispered that she was filthy from her shift, that her place was behind the cart, not at a luxury party. She would ruin the perfect aesthetic. She was ready to shrink back into the shadows where she thought she belonged. Julian would not allow it. He smoothly unbuttoned his custom tuxedo jacket, slid it off his shoulders, and gently draped the luxurious garment around Lydia's small frame, covering the chemical stains on her uniform. It was a powerful physical gesture of protection and respect. Elias offered his arm again. Julian took her other side. The three of them began to walk slowly down the thick carpet toward the heavy mahogany doors of the ballroom. They left Maya standing completely alone in the cold shadows beside the discarded $100 bill. As they approached, the jazz music grew clearer. Lydia's rubber-soled boots made no sound on the expensive carpet, but the confident footsteps of the two men beside her echoed with authority. Elias pushed the massive double doors open with one decisive motion. Brilliant crystal light flooded over them. They stepped together into the dazzling heart of the celebration. Hundreds of elite guests filled the room, laughing and drinking vintage champagne. The air was thick with the scent of the extravagant white orchids, the very flowers Lydia had paid for with her own back-breaking labor. Elias and Julian did not hesitate or hide her in a back corner. They proudly escorted her straight across the center of the dance floor toward the exclusive head table reserved for the most honored family members. Every eye in the room turned. Confused, judgmental whispers rippled through the crowd. Wealthy women hid shocked expressions behind lace fans. Powerful men wondered why Elias was bringing a maid into the party. But Elias and Julian held their heads high, radiating unapologetic pride for the woman between them. They were about to show New York high society exactly what true class looked like. They walked her directly to the head table. Julian pulled out the finest velvet chair with genuine respect and guided Lydia to sit in the place of highest honor. The whispers died into stunned silence. The entire room realized this was no mistake. This maid was their most important guest. Outside in the quiet corridor, the music became a distant throb. Maya was left alone beside the massive doors of the bridal suite. She slid down the wall to the floor, her delicate silk gown bunching around her knees. Her tear-streaked face was buried in her shaking hands. She opened her swollen eyes and saw the crumpled $100 bill still lying on the carpet. It was no longer a symbol of her new status. It was just a piece of paper mocking her choices. She had spent her adult life running from her humble roots, erasing her past to fit into glittering high society. She had believed a flawless illusion would finally make her happy. But you cannot build a permanent castle on a foundation of cruel lies. Through the thick walls, she heard sudden, roaring applause. She knew exactly what was happening inside. Elias was publicly honoring a tired hotel maid in front of his wealthiest peers. Julian was proudly holding the calloused hands of the woman who had sacrificed everything. The elite crowd was bowing in respect to the invisible foundation of her entire life. And the supposedly perfect bride sat forgotten and alone in the hallway dirt. Her massive diamond engagement ring felt cold and heavy on her finger. She had wanted to prove she was better than her struggling background. She had wanted to scrub away the smell of bleach and poverty. In her blinding pursuit of perfection, she had become the exact kind of heartless elitist she once despised. She reached out, picked up the discarded bill, and clutched it to her chest as fresh tears streamed down her face. There was no adoring audience here to comfort her. There were no flowers that could hide the rotting stench of her betrayal. She had won the ultimate American dream, but the victory was hollow and meaningless. Hours later, as the reception wound down and guests began to leave, Maya walked back into the emptying ballroom. Her gown was wrinkled and stained at the hem. Her perfect makeup was gone, washed away by hours of bitter crying. She looked like a lost, exhausted, broken young woman. She scanned the room, expecting her mother to be long gone, back on the late subway to her tiny apartment. But a mother's heart rarely follows logical rules. Lydia was still sitting quietly at the head table, patiently drinking a glass of ice water. Marcus's, Julian's, expensive tuxedo jacket still draped over her tired shoulders. Maya walked over on heavy, dragging feet and stopped in front of the quiet woman she had so brutally rejected. She did not offer more excuses. She simply looked down at her trembling hands in shame. Her voice broke as she offered a quiet, shattered apology. She admitted how toxic and cruel her desperate social climbing had been. She begged for a forgiveness she knew she did not deserve. Anyone else might have slapped her face or demanded a humiliating public apology. But Lydia slowly stood and gently closed the distance between them. She did not raise her voice or deliver a harsh lecture. She simply took both of Maya's trembling hands in her own warm grasp and looked deeply into her daughter's sorrowful eyes. She explained that true grace means offering mercy exactly when it is undeserved. A genuine mother's forgiveness is always larger than a child's worst mistake. She did not erase the pain of the betrayal, but she offered a solid bridge back to basic human decency. She gave her sobbing daughter a precious chance to start over. She told Maya she had to learn how to be a decent, honest human being first. She had to rebuild her moral compass before she could ever become a worthy partner in any marriage. From the shadows near the exit, Julian and Elias watched the quiet exchange. They witnessed the exact moment a broken family began to heal. The toxic armor of high society had finally been stripped away. The real, difficult work of building genuine character could now begin. The extravagant wedding did not end with a picture-perfect fairy tale exit or staged photographs of flawless smiles. The cameras captured something far more valuable, the raw truth of a family finally beginning to heal. They captured a proud billionaire pouring a glass of water for a tired housekeeper. They captured a wealthy groom standing firmly beside the humble woman who had given him his bride. Most people might see only a humiliating social disaster. They might think the slightly open door of the bridal suite ruined a perfect marriage. But that dimly lit corridor did not destroy a family. It acted as a brutal mirror. It smashed the toxic shell Maya had built around her heart and tore down the walls of classism and vanity she had hidden behind. Sometimes you need a painful reality check to save your own character. You need your perfectly constructed fake world to burn down so you can finally see the truth. Maya had to lose her elite standing to find her actual human soul. Lydia never asked for recognition or applause. She only ever wanted to silently protect the daughter she loved more than life itself. She was willing to remain invisible forever if it meant her child was safe. The universe has a way of rewarding that kind of selfless devotion. It made sure her rough, calloused hands were recognized as the most beautiful things in the room. Elias and Julian showed what real power looks like. They did not use their wealth to bury an uncomfortable secret. They used their privilege to elevate the person who deserved it most. They proved that a custom-tailored suit means nothing if the man wearing it lacks a spine. They proved that protecting the vulnerable is the ultimate measure of a successful man. Maya still has a long, painful road of growth ahead. She must unlearn years of toxic conditioning and misplaced shame. She must earn back the trust of the good man who almost walked away. But for the first time, she is walking on solid ground. She is no longer balancing on a fragile mountain of lies. She is finally learning how to breathe without the suffocating weight of hiding her own mother. We spend so much of our lives chasing things that do not matter. Shiny brands, exclusive invitations, the fleeting approval of strangers. We think those hollow things will shield us from feeling small. We forget the quiet sacrifices made by the people who built our foundation. But true elegance cannot be bought with a black credit card or a trust fund. It cannot be acquired by wearing a custom designer gown or renting a grand ballroom. Class is not about the expensive labels you wear on your back. It is entirely about how you treat the people who have absolutely nothing to give you.